Hi, my name is Sahira Dean. In today's webinar, we'll be talking about rubrics and assessment. So I wanted to start with showing you the images that we looked at a little bit last time in terms of doing different types of assessments in your classroom. So the idea was to have students experiment with creating tones and then use those tones in painting 3 different oranges in 3 different painting styles. So I wanted to show you, or let me first talk about, like, in terms of grading the oranges, how I did that. So I asked students really to have their tone scales out with them while they were doing their oranges so they could self-assess and see what tones are missing and what tones they needed to add, to actually get a higher grade on, the orange assignment. So with this, they could easily kind of go through and say, oh, I'm missing 2 tones, or I only have like 3 tones, or, oh, I have a big jump from, here to here, for example. So the idea was, again, for them to self-assess before they actually turned it in, for their final grade to me. So, of course, when I went in and graded it, I would go and pull up their tone scale that they completed first to make sure that they had that gradual transition from, a lighter tone to a deeper tone. And then, easily give them some feedback, and their grade was based on the comparison between the tone scale and their final product. So I wanted to show you a few student examples, or 2 in particular, because from this little assessment, we went into the project in which they had to, organize a still life, and then they jumped right into painting, the fruit still life. They had to use food. So they had to jump right into painting the food project using their idea or using their knowledge of creating tones. So in terms of student work, here's one image, and this is one of 3. They had to do one using like an impressionism style, one using a realism style, and then one using experimenting with adding contour lines. So you can see that, in terms of looking at the orange, looking at the pear and the apple, that she understands, using tones. The black is a little overpowering in terms of the shadow, but she did actually add a little bit of, purples in there to make it a little bit dark, or to make it a little bit darker. But, you can see that she's understanding how to create the tones, not just relying on black to make a paint darker, not just relying on white to make a paint lighter. So changing colors using different tones was like a big part of this assignment. Here's another image by another student, and here you can see she experimented with adding the contour lines. I would have liked to see a little bit more separation between the background and the actual fruit. But you can see the deeper tones on the lemon, in some different areas in the lime and on the orange. So in terms of grading the final project, or I guess in terms of transitioning from the value scale to the painting of the oranges to the actual project, you can see a clear growth in terms of understanding how to mix paint. So that was the goal of that assignment. I did want to share some rubrics at this time in terms of how I use those in my classroom. So let me pull up, I have 4 different rubrics. So being that we are in a hybrid teaching environment, one way that, of course, students at home, it's hard to see, them working, and then in my classroom trying to maintain social distancing, you're not necessarily, I try not to walk around as much as I would in a normal teaching year. So a big part of grading, even if it's participation, is them uploading progress on our class platform, so that I can actually give them feedback and see, well, are they, doing step one? Are they doing step two? Do I need to give them some feedback on whatever step we're on? So this rubric helps me to justify like a weekly participation grade. And I can even tweak this if I wanted to for different projects by adding in different things. But this is a good kind of a starting rubric for the climate that we're in right now. So a level of engagement, highly engaged, are they documenting, are they uploading images as they're requested, as they're due? Are they missing some steps? So it kind of goes down. Are they not hardly participating at all? And this is always evident in their different uploads. So a lot of times sometimes I'll get students to say, well, I couldn't upload, the system was down, the Wi-Fi was acting up, that kind of thing. So they can always, I leave it optional for them to upload it in a couple of different places. So that way there's no excuse in terms of, I wasn't able to do this or that. Time management, of course, is a big thing because, a lot of times, especially not being able to see some students, because we're in the hybrid teaching environment, a lot of students sometimes will upload late, so making them accountable for uploading things on time, I think is very important. So uploading consistently, especially during the class time, they get points for that. Uploading inconsistently on the class platform, and then low to no images. And then craftsmanship, of course, is a big one too, just in general. So showing care and concern for the work, little care, concern, or no care, concern. And I think wording on a rubric is important as well. I try to avoid poor, or just, that kind of verbiage when I can, just because, especially now with the hybrid teaching environment, and there a lot of students are going through different things. When you have a student that comes in daily, you can read their demeanor, see them, you can pick up on body language. So in terms of being able to hopefully not add too much of a burden, I try to stay away from certain language that I might have used, previous to the hybrid teaching environment, just because I'm not able to see the students at home and pick up on certain cues that they might give me when they come in person. So there's one rubric. Another rubric for journals and things like that is just this general one. So again, grading on composition, criteria, craftsmanship, creativity. And I keep this one loose because they have the topic changes. So, in a normal year, when they are doing journals, and they would do journals like they'd be due every other week, I would cut these out. You can see there's 6 on a page. I would cut them out, provide feedback and notes and things like that for the student, and just pop it in the journal, upon giving it back to the student. So this is a good place for, ongoing assignments. Like I have a homework sheet for the year, or a journal sheet for the year that, changes for each class, but I'm able to give feedback per student, without having to go in and change the rubric every time, the assignment comes up. So I would recommend this one for journals, possibly homework, and even possibly like when they're at the ideation stage of a assignment. So another rubric, let me pull this up, is the self-reflection project rubric. And so with this one, students are able to respond And then I'm able to read their comments, and then I can respond, to their comments, and things like that. They can ask questions. So this one is really good for just projects in general. And what I found, I really like using this one with my beginner level students, because they're able to kind of justify, and I'm able to see some of their justification for their thoughts and their things that they did in their particular projects. So they're able to go through and explain their process, the steps that they did. So for example, if we were doing a perspective drawing, they might list, well, the first thing we did was, a PowerPoint on understanding the horizon line, the vanishing points, the purpose of perspective. And then they, might talk about like going through doing the perspective boxes, and then, using that knowledge to create buildings, so they're able to kind of see and build their own connections as opposed to me spelling it out for them. So I really like this open-ended rubric. And then it allows me also to see, well, if student is not giving or listing all the steps and they scored poorly on the project, I'm able to kind of go back and look, well, were they absent? What was missing to allow the student not to score as well. Of course, they're able to identify elements and principles, which this is, definitely key, especially in a foundational class, because those terms and terminology, they of course grow throughout the different classes. So allowing them to actually use the elements and principles correctly is of course important. So I encourage students not to just list them, but use them as discussion points. So if they're talking about texture when they really meant to talk about, line or value or color, I'm able to respond to them in my column and, give it back to them and, say, reword, or, I don't think you meant this, clarify, and then they can resubmit. Of course, craftsmanship, that's a big one in all art classes, because it's their care and concern for their work that, will, sometimes make a difference in, a lot of times make a difference in grades. But, they're able to reflect on, well, I really didn't care about this, so I just, did whatever I wanted to. Or, they can say, I really enjoyed this medium, so I really, was able to, show more care and concern. And then they can just write a general reflection on the project. So this allows me to see, what projects students really like, what projects students didn't really like, and might I repeat the project? Might I tweak it a little bit before I teach it again? Or might I just scrap it altogether and do something different in the coming years? So this rubric I really like for foundational classes. Another rubric is really good, and this one I incorporated some of the standards and learning targets, and this one's really good for you can tweak this one for different classes as well. You can easily go in and change whatever standard you're grading, and so on and so forth. So this is very similar to it's kind of a culmination of some of the other rubrics I showed. But it's, specifically list the standard. So if you want to grade on one or two standards, you can easily go in and add it in and then tweak the language to fit, those or that particular standards. So this one, of course, lists, it's all the rubrics are, graded by point system. And of course, you can go in and tweak the points based on how you grade. But, there's an example of that rubric there. And I always try to leave space on the rubric for the student to write, and also for me to write, as opposed to just going down in circle. That way they could get a little more justification and rationale for their score. So I did want to show our AP rubric that I use. And being that we're in a, kind of again, another weird year. With this one, what I do is I'll take a picture of the rubric and I'll upload it into their folder on the class platform, or I'll email it to them, So here's a rubric here, and, I'll go in and just, because with AP especially, they do, they're right now at the point, of course, wrapping up their sustained investigations. So, I encourage them to name their pieces or title their pieces. So, I tried to mimic it similar to the AP rubric. I did for the first year AP portfolio reading, which was a really interesting experience. And then I was able to kind of take some of that information learned, and I tweaked the rubric that I used last year to this one. And it's kind of just simplified the language a little bit. There's some terminology and information that, I discovered that I had to really explain before handing out the rubric and then re-explain. So this one, simplified it a little bit. So in terms of just the grading scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, very similar to how the AP College Board rubric, or the AP College scores are. I try to keep that similar. And then little to no visual evidence, rudimentary, moderate, good, and then advanced. So if you're familiar with the AP College Board rubric, that's very similar to what's on that rubric. And then there's space, for the addition of some of the elements and principles, some techniques. And then if you look on the left column, the criteria, visual evidence of skills, visual relationship between materials, process, and ideas, written evidence, and then the grade conversions. And then students actually upload their written evidence on the class platform. So I'll use this in terms of, when I'm grading their work. So you can see this student's rationale or grade rationale here. And what I might do is add in one more row next year. I took out one row just to allow students a little bit more opportunity to get a higher grade. That was really the rationale for that. But next year, when we switch over to the full face-to-face, I'll probably add that row back in. But there's an example of the AP rubric that I used for that class. So I did want to show an example of a test, just in terms of, since we're talking about rubrics and assessment. Let me pull that over to the screen. So I do most of my tests in my introductory classes, like, where they have to, know vocabulary, possibly demonstrate different skills. They are very elements and principles based, just because it is an introductory class, and that's part of them, is, of course, that builds upon, that knowledge builds throughout the different classes. So it's very elements and principles based. So I wanted to show an example of one of the quizzes that I use for that class. And I do some written tests in my upper level classes, but most of it happens in the introductory classes. So you can see they're being quizzed on, this project they had to do different value scales and then apply their knowledge to a value scale to the actual project. So there were some different mini labs in the quiz or in the test. There were some different mini labs before they actually started the project. So you can see the questions are essentially based around them knowing the different techniques and the different elements and principles. So I just want to scroll through just so you can see some of the questions. And for my introductory class, they have taken throughout this semester, they have taken 3. They'll take one more test, which we're in countdown mode here to the end of the school year. So they'll have one more test after this last project or 2. So usually in them allowing them to prepare for the test, they get a study guide, which has usually about 40 to 50 questions. And then from that study guide, those questions for the quiz come directly from that study guide. Like, I don't change any of the language or anything like that. And it's the same format, so that way they're familiar with it. So that does conclude our discussion on assessment and rubrics. So thank you for listening. I really do appreciate you joining the webinar. Again, my name is Sahira Dean. Please feel free to respond to the discussions in our platform, and I will see you in the next webinar.